Hey everybody, we are back again with another video reacting to your trade ideas for NHL players. We did this last week with Patrick Laine, and that video did very well and was a lot of fun to do. So I want to keep this going and keep doing this for different players. And today we're going to be talking about Minnesota Wild defenseman Matt Dumba. Now, Matt Dumba is a guy that's been talked about in trade rumors around the NHL for really the past year and a half now, and they really ramped up again this offseason when defenseman Jonas Brodin signed a long-term extension with Minnesota. It kind of left Dumba as the odd man out on the blue line there, especially with the expansion draft coming up. They have Ryan Suter, Jared Spurgeon, and now Brodin locked into long-term contracts, and most likely the guys that they're going to protect in the expansion draft, which would then leave Dumba exposed. So it does kind of make sense for Minnesota to be entertaining trade ideas for Dumba because they can either trade him before the expansion draft, or if they can leave him exposed, and he very likely would be the guy that Seattle takes. And that would basically mean that Minnesota would lose him for nothing. So you might as well get something in a trade before that. So it certainly makes sense that Dumba's name has been talked about a lot in trade rumors. And I would not at all be surprised if he does get traded at some point over the next few months. But I asked you guys down in the comments of the community tab post about this video to drop your Matt Dumba trade offers, and I've picked a few of those to react to here today. So let's get into it. This is always a lot of fun. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you are new. Both of those things help out so much and are greatly appreciated. But we're going to get started here with a trade offer from Brandon, who says, to the Minnesota Wild, Matthew Perreault and a 2021 first-round draft pick, and to the Winnipeg Jets, Matt Dumba. Okay, so this is an interesting one. Dumba is a $6 million defenseman on the cap. First thing I want to look at is this salary cap doable? Matthew Perreault makes, I believe, a little over $4 million per year. So this would certainly pick up salary from the Jets standpoint, but only about a couple $1 million. And once Brian Little is put on LTIR, they will have that money. So cap-wise, this one does work. As long as Brian Little does go to LTIR, which he is fully expected to. Now let's look at it value-wise. Obviously, I think the Wild would be very excited about that first-round pick. They obviously, when you're moving on from a player like Dumba, who is a pretty darn good defenseman, you're going to want a decent amount in return. I'm not sure if they'd be in on Matthew Perreault. I think they'd be more likely to go after a younger player, although Minnesota's been a little interesting this offseason where they've gone out and gotten a guy like Nick Bonino, and they've made other moves for some older guys, Marcus Johansson as well. So even though Perreault's 32 and kind of a third-line player, maybe the first-round pick would be enough for Minnesota to pull the trigger on that deal and say, yeah, we get Perreault for a year. He'll be a veteran filler in the lineup, but we get that first-round pick for Dumba, and that maybe would be enough. I personally think that Minnesota would want a little bit more for Dumba. Maybe instead of Perreault, a younger player, or at least somebody with some term left on his contract who's a little bit better than a third-line type guy. But who knows? This one's kind of close. This one's definitely close. I think the Wild would entertain that as kind of like a original kind of foundation for the trade, and then maybe tweak some things here or there. But I do think that they would be very, very interested in that first-round pick, to say the least. Next up, from Salty Wings and AbsFan, he says, to the Minnesota Wild, Justin Holl and a second-round draft pick. To the Toronto Maple Leafs, Matt Dumba. Okay, so the Leafs are a team that have been rumored to be, particularly the trade deadline last year, interested in Matthew Dumba. Looking at this trade, though, obviously right off the bat, salary cap wise, this isn't going to be a go. The Toronto Maple Leafs cannot take on a $6 million cap hit like Matt Dumba's without moving a significant amount of money out. And Justin Holl, I believe, makes $2.8 million per year. So That's not enough money going out for this to work salary cap wise. And even from a value standpoint, I think this is not enough to get Matthew Dumba out of Minnesota. Justin Holl's is pretty solid D-man, but he's 28 years old. He's kind of a 4, 5, 6 type guy. He's not really, gonna launch himself up to being a top pair D-man or anything like that. Second round pick, again, I think they'd much rather get a first out of it than for Dumba. I just don't think that's enough coming from Toronto, from Minnesota, to really be interested in this deal. I do think, Justin Holl would be able to kind of fill that hole on the defense left by Dumba. But I think if you change that pick to maybe a first-round draft pick, they'd be a little more interested there. But at the same time, I don't even know if the Maple Leafs at this point would even be in on Dumba, because now all of a sudden, with Mikko Lehtonen coming over, with Rasmus Sandin kind of ready to be a full-time NHLer, all with Travis Dermott back re-signed, there's kind of a backlog of defensemen now with the Maple Leafs. And they're a team that now kind of have 8 defensemen. They added Zach Bogosian as well. If they were to bring in Dumba, obviously that would be an upgrade to their defense, but they would have to send down or waive somebody most likely to add him to that group, because you're looking at, TJ Brody, who they just brought in, Morgan Riley, Jake Muzzin, Justin Holl, who obviously would be gone with this deal. But, then they have Mikko Lehtonen, then they have Rasmus Sandin, then they have Travis Dermott, then they have Zach Bogosian, who they brought in. So they really kind of have 8 defensemen already in Toronto right now. And I just don't see this deal happening, because I think the Wild would want more for Dumba, and the Leafs really don't need to add to that defense, at least not right now. I think they need to kind of see which of these guys can play and which of them can't at the NHL level before they kind of make any moves defensively. So next on the list, from Perlo Wisdom, we have a very interesting trade here to the Minnesota Wild, Brock Nelson, and to the New York Islanders, Matt Dumba. So this is really, really interesting. First off, salary cap-wise, this would be a complete wash, because Brock Nelson and Matt Dumba both make $6 million per season. I certainly think that the Wild desperately are looking to improve up front, particularly down the middle, and Brock Nelson is a top 6 center who would greatly, greatly help the Wild. So that would very much be a team need filled right there. And the Islanders, who have lost Johnny Boychuk this offseason and had to trade away Devon Taves, are looking all of a sudden a little thin on the back end, and I think they'd be very interested in Matt Dumba. So this is a very realistic trade opportunity, in my opinion. If you're the Islanders and you want to get better on the back end, here's a chance. If you're the Wild and you want to get better up front, here's a chance. Now, the only question I have is, would the Islanders give up Brock Nelson? I really don't think that they want to move on from him. So that makes it a little unlikely, I would say, because I don't think the Islanders want to give up Brock Nelson. The Wild, I think, would 100% do this. And from a value standpoint, I think you're right on here, Perlo. This would be a very realistic value-wise trade. The only thing holding me back from saying, like, this could legitimately happen is I really don't think the Islanders want to move on from Nelson. But everything else about this is screams great trade. Next up, DMV Sportsnet gives us to the Minnesota Wild, Ben Bishop, Rupe Hintz, Ty Dellandrea, and a 2021 first-round pick to the Dallas Stars, Matt Dumba. Wow. Okay, so right off the bat with this one, this is a complete overpayment for Matt Dumba. Dallas is not going to give up all of this for Dumba. That would be way, way, way too much to give up for a top 4 D-man. I mean, Dumba's good, don't get me wrong, but it's not like you're trading for a top 5 defenseman. Or, this isn't Alex Pietrangelo or John Carlson or Roman Josi coming back. Like, this is Matt Dumba is certainly a step down from there. He's got some really good offensive upside, but he does struggle in his own zone at times. And he's a top 4 guy without a doubt, but it's not like he's a superstar. They would not give up both Ben Bishop and Rupe Hintz in this deal. I think you could repackage this maybe as Rupe Hintz and a first-round pick to the Wild for Dumba, and I think that would be a very realistic trade that they both would think about. Even if you threw Ty Dellandrea in there, Hintz, Dellandrea, and a first, I think Minnesota would certainly take that. And I think, if the Stars really wanted to add a top 4 D-man on the back end there, they could go in on something like that. And although I'm not really sure that Dallas needs to add a top 4 defenseman. Defense is kind of their strong suit, and they've got Miro Heiskanen, who's one of the absolute best young D-men in the league. They've got John Klingberg, who is a veteran at this point, but still very, very solid. They're pretty good on the back end. Again, this deal, as DMV has it, would be a complete overpayment for Dumba. Maybe if Minnesota wanted to improve in goal, obviously there's some questions there. They've got Talbot, they've got Stalock. But, are either of those guys a legit number 1? If they wanted, maybe you could get Bishop in a first-round pick for Dumba. That would be, with Hudobin the starter in Dallas. And then, they've got Jake Ottinger, who could take over easily the backup role. That's something Dallas could think about. So I think you could take pieces out of this deal to make it more realistic. But this deal in itself is just a complete overpayment, and Dallas would be giving up way too much. And finally, that brings us to our last one, to the Minnesota Wild, Jack Roslovic and a 4th-round pick, and to the Winnipeg Jets, another Winnipeg trade here, Matt Dumba. All right, so obviously the Winnipeg is a team that desperately needs defense. They would kill for a top 4 defenseman to be added to that defense in Winnipeg. So right off the bat, that makes sense. From a salary cap standpoint here, Roslovic is making, we don't know what he's making yet because he's still an RFA that does not have a contract yet. He's a 23-year-old guy who can play wing or center for the Winnipeg Jets. Now, I do like this deal in the fact that it's Roslovic going back to Minnesota rather than Matthew Perreault, as stated in the earlier trade, because I think Minnesota would be much more interested in a younger guy like Roslovic, who's 23, rather than a 32-year-old Matthew Perreault. Now, 4th-round pick, I think that might have to be higher. I think, if you made that a 2nd-round pick, then this is a deal that certainly gets done. I apologize. Did I even say who this trade was from? This was from Vlior. I'm not exactly sure how to say that. Hopefully I didn't butcher your name. Yeah, Roslovic in a 4th, I don't think would probably be enough for Minnesota, but Roslovic in a 2nd, I think would be, or certainly Roslovic in a 1st. Minnesota would do that, absolutely no questions asked. Would Winnipeg do that? I'm not so sure. They'd want to give up Roslovic and the 1st, but they are desperate for defense, so that would probably be something that they'd at least have to consider, because Matt Dumba, man, would that change things for the Winnipeg Jets. And giving up Roslovic, I mean, he hasn't been able to crack the top 6. He's been a 3rd-line guy for them. Obviously, he's still young. He still has upside potential, but with their top 6 as good as it is, he hasn't been able to work into that top 6 role, and they tried him at 2nd-line center, and it just didn't work out. So they had to go out and trade again for Paul Stastny and bring him back. So Roslovic is a guy I think that that Winnipeg would be willing to move, particularly if it could improve their defense. So I like this trade a lot. I think it's very realistic. Now, I do think that the draft pick would have to be a little bit higher from a Minnesota from a Minnesota standpoint, but I certainly think the Wild would be interested in Roslovic. The Jets would certainly be interested in Dumba. And the 4th-round pick, I think would probably have to be a 1st or a 2nd, probably a 2nd, for both teams to agree to it. But this is very, very close here to being something that could actually happen. So there you have it, guys. Those are the your reacting to your Matt Dumba trades and your trade offers down in the comments of that community tab post. Again, I want to keep doing this with different players, a new player for each episode. And I apologize if your trade that you commented did not make the video, but obviously we've got a limited amount of time here and a limited number of trades that I can talk about, and I get more trades commented than I can fit in the video without making the video way too long. So, you know, if yours didn't make this one, you know, keep commenting and maybe it will make the next video. And I'm going to try and get different people's trades in here as we keep doing these. But with that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon merchandise store and donation link are in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you guys soon.